Cars today, for many people, are simply a way to get from A to B, with different makes and models coming and going over the years, as even the latest innovations quickly pass their sell-by dates. However, some cars seem to effortlessly transcend this trend, proving to be eternally popular, not only as a means of transport, but also as a significant contributor to social and cultural history as well. Now, if we're talking cult cars, there's one vehicle that'll immediately spring to mind, and love it or hate it, the Volkswagen Beetle is about as iconic as a car can be. This is one of the most popular and easily recognisable cars of the 20th century, and since its initial design in the 1930s, it's actually changed very little. Originally created as a cheap and reliable family vehicle, the car's popularity over the years has transformed the VW Beetle into a cult classic. Young or old, rich or poor, it's very hard to find someone who can't be won over by this car's unique character and charm, and its modern-day relaunch has allowed a whole new generation to experience the Beetle for themselves. The Beetle's interesting design was revolutionary for its day, being unlike any other car in the motoring industry. And despite multiple versions and special editions, it has essentially remained unchanged for over 50 years. During its lifetime, it's morphed into a military vehicle, been the star of the silver screen, and has captured the hearts of millions worldwide. In fact, only the revolutionary Mini and the Model T Ford come close in terms of popularity and longevity. Nevertheless, the beginnings of the Beetle were extremely humble, as it was conceived as an inexpensive mass-market car that was affordable for the majority of people. Yet no one could have predicted that the car would go on to be the biggest-selling single model of all time. Its unique shape, coupled with its strong build and reliable mechanics, ensured that the Beetle remained popular with millions. In fact, the original design was still being produced until 2003 in Mexico, more than half a century after the first cars rolled off the production line in 1939. The Beetle's amazing journey begins with the government of the National Socialist German Workers' Party in the 1930s, otherwise known as the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933 with a mandate to improve the flagging German economy, struggling to pay the war debt incurred after World War I. Hitler himself never drove, although he did love cars and was known for his keen interest in vehicles. Because of the country's dire economic state and his enthusiasm for cars, he wanted to produce a vehicle that fitted certain economic constraints. Hitler insisted that his new car must be able to carry a regular family of 2 adults and 3 children at a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour at a cost that was no more expensive than a motorbike and sidecar. Adolf Hitler may have been many things, however, he was definitely not a car designer, but luckily there were talented engineers on hand who'd already been developing similar ideas. The car designer at the forefront was a man called Ferdinand Porsche, and you'd be right in thinking that the name of Porsche and economy rarely go together in the same sentence. Porsche cars are the epitome of speed and style, and this 1990 Porsche 928 S4 is no exception. You can see for yourself why this car has been nicknamed the Land Shark due to its elegant and menacing appearance when the headlights are down and, more importantly, because it can metaphorically eat up large distances of road in no time at all. Porsche cars, sadly, are, let's face it, beyond most people's budget, but this wasn't always the case. Originally, Porsche was involved in military vehicle manufacture, but it wasn't until Ferdinand Porsche's son was allowed near the design studios that the iconic style of the luxury sports cars we know and love today began to develop. Ferdinand Porsche, like Adolf Hitler, was very concerned about Germany's economy. During the 1920s, German citizens endured severe economic hardships as inflation soared to never-before-seen levels. Then, soon after this, the Great Depression set in. For a German working-class family, car ownership was out of the question. Only the upper classes could afford to buy and run one. The need for a cheap, economical small car was pushed to the forefront of the motoring world, and Porsche quickly recognised this and decided to do something about it. In 1931, he started to draw up sketches of a car that would be affordable to the average German citizen. He wanted to make a people's car, one that was practical, unconventional, radical and small. He also wanted an air-cooled engine, mainly because he'd just designed one to go in a similar car. Porsche had given himself a hard task, as he needed a vehicle that would basically be totally different from any car that already existed. Working largely alone, the design he finally came up with met these specifications perfectly. The main features included a bonnet that dropped forward in a curve to the front fender, an upright windscreen, a sharply sloping roof that appeared to allow little or no headroom for the rear seat passengers, and a rear window that showed nothing but sky. Sound familiar? Without knowing it, Porsche had just designed the prototype for the modern-day Type 1 Beetle sedan. When Adolf Hitler saw these designs, he knew straight away that Ferdinand Porsche was the right man for the job. The German government, whom Hitler was now leader of, gave their full support to the people's car. Porsche worked tirelessly on the specifications, and just 2 years later, 3 prototypes were unveiled before a jubilant Hitler. The car more than matched his requirements, while keeping the rounded design that is still cherished today and the air-cooled flat-4 rear-mounted engine that Porsche wanted. In fact, it's often thought that Hitler first coined the common name for the flat engine as he inspected the cars. When he was looking at the engine, it's been reported that he said the top looked a little like the fists of a boxer as he strikes them together before a fight, and the name boxer motor has been used ever since. In 1938, only 7 years after its original conception, the car was ready to be produced. Hitler had complete control in Germany by now and could demand anything he wanted. He ordered a factory to be built in Low Saxonia in the middle of Germany, and its only purpose was to manufacture the people's car. Hitler also announced that the public could use a savings scheme where they bought stamps to pay for the car. It seemed like a foolproof plan to win the hearts and minds of the German people. He was even allowed to name the car and decided to call it the KDF-Wagen, which literally translates as the Strength Through Joy car. The government had so much faith in this car that they decided to build a new town for the workers named KDF-Stadt. In such dark times for world history, all was set for the launch of the new car, and its modern and revolutionary design looked set to fill a gap in the motoring market. But by the latter stages of 1938, Germany, under Hitler's domination, was now in serious conflict with many of her European neighbours. Then, when Hitler's troops stormed into Poland in 1939, despite an ultimatum from the British government, there was no other option available, and Britain and her allies declared war on Germany. Not surprisingly, production of the KDF Wagen, a family car for the leisure market, was halted as all industrial production became focused on military armaments. This could well have been the end of the car before it had even had a chance to get started, but thankfully it proved to be a postponement rather than complete abandonment. During the Second World War, the KDF Wagen factory switched from civil production to military, but they still had a car they could work with. All it took was Ferdinand Porsche's clever designs to adapt the car into something that the German military could utilise. Porsche used the strong chassis from the car to create military vehicles, with the first out of the factory being the Kubelwagen. When you first encounter a Kubelwagen, it simply looks like a cruder, tougher Beetle, and in many respects, that's precisely what it is. The Kubelwagen was a Jeep-like car that was especially effective in North Africa's desert climate. Nazi generals weren't renowned for their vanity, and when Ferdinand Porsche presented the first batch, the feedback was very positive. But they wanted the car to look a little meaner, and Porsche was more than happy to oblige. The Kubelwagen was an extremely popular car with the military during the war, and Porsche even developed this car further to produce the Schwimmwagen, a version that was amphibious. These military vehicles helped to keep the factory working, although many of the people on the production line were prisoners of war, and it's reported that at one time 12,000 POWs were working in horrendous conditions in the factory. Ferdinand Porsche also thought it would make good economic sense to get concentration camp prisoners behind the war effort, so created the Arbeitsdorf camp in 1942 to help produce more vehicles. Thankfully, this camp was shut down, as production slowed 6 months later. Sadly though, 6,000 prisoners had already perished in the camp in that short space of time, a crime against humanity that Ferdinand Porsche would be arrested for after the war, but he was quickly cleared of all charges. Production in the main factory had also turned to bomb making, as larger and stronger weapons were needed. The factory produced the infamous flying buzz bomb, and even in production, this devastating weapon went under the chilling name Retribution. This was the bomb that could, against a less resilient enemy, have won the war for the German forces, and over 2,000 of them landed on London, killing at least 5,000 people. It devastated London. However, the Allies fought back even harder, and by the end of April 1945, the war was lost for Germany. by September, World War II was finally over. Germany had a big task ahead to rebuild economic prosperity, and it looked as if the Beetle would become a casualty of war. However, phoenix-like, it rose from the ashes and miraculously survived. The person responsible for the Beetle's salvation was a British officer by the name of Major Ivan Hurst, who took up the little car's cause. The story goes that the Major was sent into the factory to dismantle an unexploded Allied bomb that had lodged itself between two pieces of equipment. While in the factory, the Major discovered a number of half-built cars, the remains of the car producing equipment and a few of the workers. Hurst struck upon the idea of restarting the production line so the cars could be used for the Allied forces that were stationed in Germany. With Porsche's 1939 design as a guide, the factory workers scavenged any undamaged materials and started to produce the car on machines that had survived the bombing raids. There was a lot of hard work to do to save this car, and many people thought that Hurst would not be able to pull it off. Ford told him that it was an awful car and not worth the trouble. Also Roots, the now defunct motorcar manufacturer, described Hurst as a bloody fool for spending so much time on such an ugly and noisy car which they predicted would fail within the space of 2 years. Hurst ignored all the warnings, and his hard work eventually paid off when at the end of 1945, after one false start and at very low levels of production, Porsche's People's Car was launched. It was named the Type 1 sedan and was a very basic model with an 1100cc engine and non-synchromesh gearbox, cable brakes, 4-speed transmission and little bright work compared to the more modern Beetles. From scrounging scrap metal and making cars from the remains that lay around the factory floor, the workers had started this car on a journey that would change the face of automotive history. In just a few months, the factory had secured an order to supply the British military with 20,000 of the vehicles, and by September 1946 there were over 8,000 workers producing 1,000 vehicles a month. Major Hurst had done everything that he wanted to do, and it was always his plan to hand the company back over to the Germans. Before this happened, though, Hurst changed the car and the town's Nazi-era names. KDF-Stadt was changed to Wolfsburg, and KDF-Wagen became known as Volkswagen. By the end of 1946, Heinrich Nordhoff had taken charge of Volkswagen and built upon Hurst's groundwork with the resurrected car, which was destined to become a household name. The Beetle had well and truly started its journey after a very shaky start. Interestingly, the name Beetle is not the first title given to the car by its manufacturers, as it was originally named the Type 1. The Beetle is nothing more than a nickname given to it by the people of Europe, who obviously drew similarities between the car's rounded shape and that of a beetle's hard shell. The car has been lovingly re-nicknamed in countries all over the world. In Indonesia, the car is called the Frog, perhaps because of its large headlamps. In Norway, it's known as the Bubble, and in the United States, it has the familiar title of the Bug. Nevertheless, the workers on the Type 1 quickly picked up on Beetle, and the nickname has stuck ever since. Perhaps Ferdinand Porsche took the natural world as his inspiration for this car, because the styling has certainly given it longevity, as despite the shape becoming dated over the years, compared to the new and futuristic designs of modern vehicles, the Beetle remains as appealing as ever. The people of Europe instantly fell in love with the Beetle, taking the delightful little car firstly to their hearts and then onto the open roads. For many years, only minor changes were made to the Beetle, with the outer shell remaining pretty much the same, and Volkswagen's customers certainly had no complaints. The popularity of the car just kept on growing. In 1948, 19,000 cars were sold, and just a year later, that number had more than doubled in size to 46,000. Even though people were still recovering from the war physically, mentally and financially, the reliability and affordability of the Beetle ensured that the car was a practical option for the vast majority of families. The car had long been a middle-class form of transport, but thankfully Volkswagen had brought reliable, private automotive transport to the masses. Once the 1950s dawned, and people were fast recovering from the war, the motoring industry also began to change and move forward. Rival car manufacturers from around the world began to design and produce vehicles that were small, economical and reliable. As a result, the decade became known as the era of the bubble and microcar, because all around Europe, car buyers could choose from such classics as the Fiat 500, the Renault Dauphine, the Citroën 2CV, and of course that other great icon of the motor industry, the Mini. Exports for the Beetle were, however, slow throughout the rest of the world. When Volkswagen first exported the car in 1949 to the United States, they only sold 2 cars. Despite this initial failure, Volkswagen continued to work hard to make the Beetle an international success. Knowing that they would face stiff competition, they launched the car in countries such as Holland, Denmark, Luxembourg, Sweden, Switzerland and Belgium, hoping that their reputation and the car's unique design would conquer the small car market closer to home first. Success in Europe was a big step forward, and then in 1953 they started to produce the Beetle in both Brazil and America. By 1955, 1 million VW Type 1 Beetles had been sold, a mere 10 years after its first post-war appearance, and to mark the occasion, Volkswagen produced a special gold edition of the car. The reliability of the car owed much to the work that Ferdinand Porsche carried out during the war with his fleet of military vehicles. The Schwimmwagen and Kubelwagen were sturdy cars that could stand up to the pounding of everyday military use, and parts of these were used in the Beetle. As already mentioned, the Beetle had an air-cooled engine which safeguarded it against overheating, and meant the car was suitable for use anywhere in the world. This cooling system ensured that the car could keep on going and going. Cars at that time were not yet up to scratch for long hot journeys, while for the Beetle it was nothing out of the ordinary. In 1959, the first Italian motorway opened, and in just 9 months there were 774 cases of overheating engines. A Beetle was subjected to an endurance race along this hot stretch of roadway to see how it would perform. 2 Beetles were driven along a 100-mile stretch of motorway for 16 consecutive days. One of the Beetles travelled an amazing 23,000 miles, and reports suggested that the car could have carried on going if needed. The other car had a few minor faults that made it pull out of the endurance test early, but it had still travelled farther than most cars of the day ever could. This was a real testament to how well built these inexpensive little cars really were, and when news of the Beetle's performance travelled, sales figures went through the roof. Even more importantly, the rest of the car matched the engine cooling system in every respect. Great care went into ensuring that everything met these extremely high standards, and even to this day, Volkswagens are renowned for their build quality. If people were going to buy their cars, Volkswagen wanted them to have the best quality at the most affordable prices. As the car was shipped to more and more marketplaces, the Beetle's popularity increased in an incredibly short space of time. Word of mouth, coupled with great advertising slogans such as "Beauty is only skin deep" and "Think small," helped to give the car the iconic status that played a vital part in making sure that everyone wanted one. In just a few years, the car had gone from a speculative gamble made by piecing bits together off the floor of a part-bombed factory to a worldwide phenomenon. Remarkably, in 1958, against all the odds, and through tough competition from rival car manufacturers the world over, the Beetle was more popular than any other small vehicle in the US and Europe. What is even more surprising is that it had achieved this without Volkswagen launching a new version. The car's status continued to grow. Slowly, the 50s gave way to the 60s, which brought a new era of peace, love, fashion, and hippies. The youth of the world started to see that the future of the planet may well be in their generation's hands. Pop music challenged new boundaries, and fashions were at their most original. It was also a decade where small cars became strong cult icons in Britain. It was the Mini, and in America it was the Beetle. By 1965, although micro cars were popular throughout Europe, it was only the Beetle that was a huge success in America. Its compact size meant that American-made cars, like the well-known Ford Mustang, looked like overbearing giant machines by comparison. The VW Beetle and VW Type 2 camper van was a must for any young trendsetter. The car came to symbolise an inexpensive, reliable alternative that became popular with the so-called children of the 60s. These really were Volkswagen's wonder years, and they were close to reaching the pinnacle of their popularity. Then 1967 brought some of the biggest changes that the Beetle would undergo, but not so much in terms of the inner workings of the vehicle. The designers of the car had seen what a style icon the Beetle had become, and this update was the first where the primary concern was the cosmetic appearance of the vehicle. Amongst other modifications, the headlights were made round and vertical, while the bumper size was increased. But they didn't reinvent it, they just made it slightly more attractive to potential buyers. At the same time, they introduced two new models, one with a 1300cc engine and the other with a 1500cc version, with both of these given updated gearboxes and disc brakes. These new models and changes kept the car in front of the competition and kept the new buyers coming in. Not only did this help to maintain the Beetle's massive popularity, but also in 1968, the car's cult status and success earned it a starring role in the Disney film The Love Bug. A 1963 US spec sunroof sedan Beetle with 40 brake horsepower, white and grey interior and racing stripes played the film's lead role as Herbie, which spurred many sequels and even a 2005 film called Herbie Fully Loaded. About 30 Beetles were needed for the making of the original Disney film. However, unfortunately for Volkswagen, because it didn't sponsor it, all of their logos and badges were removed. People still recognised the car, however, and the Love Bug helped to boost sales to over 1 million a year in the US. It seemed as though nothing could stop this car's world domination. But Volkswagen were relying too heavily on this wonder car, and slowly the inevitable happened. The public's appetite began to dwindle. Everyone who really wanted a Beetle had one, and other cars were being released onto the market that enticed new buyers away from Volkswagen's signature car. In Europe, Fiat had already overtaken Volkswagen as Europe's biggest selling car manufacturer. It was at this point that Nordhoff, although seriously ill, decided that the future of the Volkswagen company couldn't just rely on the sales of the Beetle. By the end of the 60s, the empire that Nordhoff had helped to create with the Volkswagen Beetle that seemed invincible was really faltering. Sales were down. Nordhoff decided that a new design was needed to keep his much-loved company alive. The Volkswagen reins were taken over by Kurt Lotz, who wanted to move away from the Beetle, although wisely, he also recognised how many people held the car in truly great esteem. Volkswagen were being threatened by competition from other car manufacturers, as many of them had started to make compact cars that were as good as, if not better than, the Beetle. The new US-built Chevrolet Vega and Ford Pinto gave American car buyers the cheap price, room and economy that they demanded, at a time when petrol prices were on the increase. All of these factors were really beginning to put the Beetle's future in jeopardy, and drastic measures were called for. So Volkswagen began designing another car to take the lead as their new signature vehicle. It would have a water-cooled engine, front-wheel drive, and would be called the VW Golf. Producing new cars inevitably takes time, and Volkswagen needed to come up with a solution for their dwindling sales with immediate effect, as the Golf would not be ready for another 5 years. It was for this reason that towards the end of 1969, Lotz announced that he had no other choice except to lower the price of the Beetle, which, although great news for the consumers, simply confirmed how much of a crisis Volkswagen and the Beetle were facing. Lots also said they needed to create a new modernised version that matched the standard set by the compact cars now flooding the market. Without delay, the designers and engineers at Volkswagen started work on a new version of their best-selling car, and they called it the Super Beetle. Along with a bigger boot and improved chassis, the Super Beetle was given improved engines, either 1300cc or 1600. However, because they were much larger than the original, Volkswagen had to increase the size of the rear deck. This wasn't an attractive or stylish change, and many of the purists preferred the standard Beetle, even though the engine was not so powerful. Both engines featured dual-port cylinder heads for better performance, and later models were fitted with fuel injection so that they met the stricter US emission standards. And Volkswagen didn't stop there when they were designing the car. They also inserted the now well-known crescent-shaped air vents behind the rear windows, so that the interior of the Super Beetle could stay cool. Even though it was fitted with these extra creature comforts, in order for it to stand any chance against its rivals, the handling and ride also needed to be improved. The original design was old and outdated, and a journey in a Beetle may have been fun, but it was far from smooth. To do this, the design team incorporated the now widely used McPherson suspension system. This not only gave the car a better turning radius and a much more comfortable ride, it also made the steering far more precise and responsive. Because of this design, the Super Beetle would handle better than any of its predecessors. After only a couple of years in development, the car was launched and was officially named the 1302 Super Beetle. Not surprisingly, the car sold quite well, and people loved all the new features that were offered. The optional extras like air conditioning and semi-automatic transmission only helped to boost its popularity, and Volkswagen's future was finally looking up. Although the new car could compete with others from all over the motoring industry, its immediate success wasn't just because of its brand new design. It was partly down to its success and cult status in the 50s and 60s, for people still knew they were buying into something beyond just an everyday car. Also, Volkswagen's excellent reputation didn't hurt sales either, and in February of 1970, all of the company's attempts to rekindle interest in the dying Beetle paid off. 15,007,033 may just seem like a random number, but having sold this many Beetles worldwide, Volkswagen could now claim the world record for the most produced single-make of car in history. The Model T Ford, a car that started the whole of the affordable automotive revolution off way back in the early 1900s, had previously held this record. The next 4 years were good times for the Beetle. Sales were steady, and the people of the world were still in love with the charming little car. Nevertheless, in the background, the engineers at Volkswagen had been hard at work on the VW Golf that lots wanted to produce, and they were ready to start making the car. So, in 1974, after almost 30 years of being manufactured at the Wolfsburg plant, production of the Beetle was moved to Emden to make way for the new signature vehicle. A move to another factory may not appear to be such a big deal. However, it seemed to foretell what the future had in store for the Beetle, as the road ahead became distinctly rocky. To begin with, the move to Emden didn't affect the car at all, and business went ahead as normal. Modifications were still made, so that the car complied with the new 1974 safety regulations, and judging by the year's sales brochure, Volkswagen were very happy with the Super Beetle and how it was selling. The brochure, complete with a picture of a red 1303 Beetle and the slogan, "The VW Beetles, built better than ever," on the cover, also seemed to hint that they were optimistic about the car's future. But for once, their optimism was sadly misplaced. People were just not buying cars like they used to, and the Beetle still struggled to compete with the newer styles of cars from other manufacturers. In February 1975, sales of the Beetle had dropped from 791,023 to a record low of 441,116. Although this still sounds like a huge number of cars being sold, Volkswagen were used to dominating the market. They'd been selling over 1 million Beetles a year in the USA alone when production was at its height, and this harsh drop signalled that the car had to be replaced or, at the very least, faded out slowly if the company was going to survive. Fortunately, Volkswagen's new car, the Golf, was selling extremely well. So it was decided that their factories would turn to producing the car that the public obviously wanted to buy, and to sideline production and advertising of the Beetle. Was the decision that would finally kill off the Beetle in Europe. Sadly, on January the 10th, 1980, the last iconic VW Beetle Carman Cabriolet rolled off the production line. After 30 years, the original, now Mexican-built, Type 1 Beetle sedan was all that remained. Throughout the 1980s and much of the 90s, it lingered in the background of the motoring world as automotive technology moved quickly on, driving the Beetle further into the shadows. The end of production was a major blow for everyone connected with the Beetle, as they really didn't want to lose the vehicle that made Volkswagen such a respected and well-loved company. The car was removed from the European market in 1985, which was a near-fatal blow that Volkswagen found it very hard to recover from. The Mexicans may still have been going strong producing the car. However, this was a very small percentage of the overall market, and most people didn't even know that the Beetle was still being produced. Their new signature car, the Golf, had swiftly become Europe's biggest seller. But without the Beetle alongside it, they still recorded a record £500 million loss. The Beetle was more than a car. It was the symbol of Volkswagen. It was their crowning glory. Without it, the company seemed to lose direction. VW's Beetle-fueled reputation for strong, reliable design became a thing of the past. They were now known for their uneven quality and uninspired styling. By the end of 1993, sales for the Golf in the US had plummeted to just 49,500. Volkswagen were losing out to Toyota, Honda and Ford. The struggle was on for the next few years. Despite making some very good cars, none of them were yet ready to match the Beetle in terms of style or popularity. Volkswagen needed something to revive their fortunes, a car that would once again excite the consumer and bring the customers back. It would have to be a car that would not only be a great drive, but also had to get people talking. The answer was, of course, the Beetle, and the decision was taken to totally transform the company's greatest car. The old-style Beetle lost out because of more modern-looking, safer cars with a better drive, and, inevitably, Volkswagen needed a new direction for their old friend. The resulting journey that totally revolutionised the Beetle was the mastermind of two car designers working for Volkswagen in America, Freeman Thomas and Jay Mays. To begin with, their thinking was seen as controversial. Some of Volkswagen's German shareholders thought the car represented the stigma of Hitler's Third Reich, and rather than reinvent the Beetle, they preferred to concentrate on the Golf. However, the Americans promised the German management that the new Beetle would be characterized as being honest, simple, reliable, and original. Volkswagen liked the sound of this, and the American designers were given the go-ahead. They believed that because of its previous popularity, particularly with the American market, and its status as a cultural and automotive icon, a brand new modernised Beetle would be a good way to revive the company's fortunes. The first car that was designed was labelled Concept 1. The hype around it was huge. When it was unveiled at the 1994 North American International Motor Show, the public response was overwhelming, and apparently, according to urban legend, one woman even tried to put down a deposit on one. This new car was instantly recognisable. However, it was not the old Beetle rehashed with a slightly newer shape. It was a complete rethink of the original idea. The new Beetle retained the car's charm and character. However, it was totally updated for the modern driver who expected a more comfortable, responsive and altogether safer drive. The car-buying public of America were anxious for the release of this much publicised vehicle, and in 1998, almost 20 years after the last Beetle was sold in the USA, the new Beetle was released to an eager audience. This Volkswagen has proved very popular all over the world. It looks as if this remarkable car has many more miles to travel. The original Beetle was finally phased out in 2003, with the last car rolling off the production line on the 30th of July in Pueblo, Mexico. It was 65 years after the public launch of the KDF-Wagen in Nazi Germany, and this very special Beetle was immediately shipped to the Volkswagen Museum in Wolfsburg. By this time, the Golf had become a great bestseller in its own right and is continuing to go from strength to strength. In point of fact, the Golf has become as strongly identified with the youthful drivers of the new millennium as the generation of post-war teenagers in the 1950s and 60s who first made the Beetle their own. Without doubt, the Volkswagen Beetle has enjoyed one of the most interesting and varied journeys of any car in automotive history, and it's a story that spanned well over 60 years. There's still no sign of it stopping in the future, distant or otherwise. The car may not be the phenomenon today that it once was. However, it's still loved and driven by millions. From a random thought in the twisted mind of Adolf Hitler, right through to starring in films, being at the heart of the swinging 60s, and getting moved from factory to factory until falling into a decline, the Beetle really has survived whatever the world has thrown at it. The success of the car is quite extraordinary, and considering most people thought that this remnant of World War II production would fail miserably, the Beetle has undoubtedly exceeded all expectations. Looking over its lifetime, it would be hard to guess what the future has in store for the Beetle. The car made Volkswagen a household name. It moved them to the top of the automotive trade, and when the Beetle fell into a slump, so did the company. The Beetle is a true survivor, and its redesign in the 1990s breathed new life into the car, and it has once again become a part of fashionable society. As we've seen throughout this programme, people's tastes change. While there's every chance the car-buying public may fall out of love with the Beetle again at some stage, you can be sure that when the time is right, it'll be back again. Even if production did stop, you could rest assured that this resilient little car would never disappear without a fight. And if past form is anything to go by, chances are the Beetle will always win. As time goes by, the original Volkswagen Beetles are inevitably getting rarer, and you're more likely to spot them at specialist shows now than out on the road. But as long as there are new variations upon the Beatles' classic theme, there will forever be plenty for the enthusiast to enjoy, and that has to be a very good thing indeed.